Welcome to the speaker series on a shot glass of recovery.
Yeah. You get a house, you get a car, then you start thinking that's all you are, but you don't know the truth. So let me spell it out for you. Now I got your attention, now there's a start. Now sit and listen to my favorite part. Life's been giving us some clues. The answer lies inside of you.
I am Lisa, the host of A Shot Glass of Recovery, and this is our speaker series. Let's sit back and get ready for some more experience, strength, and hope.
Thank you so much. I'm an alcoholic. My name's Matt Wunderlich to be exact, and we're in Eureka, Missouri is where we are. So that's about 35 minutes southwest of the city of St. Louis, just in case anybody wants to get their bearings, or in case anybody wants to come here in 2030 because the International is coming to the state of Missouri in 2030. So hope to see some of you there. We're looking forward to it. We actually just got, this is my wife, Kay. She's one of us, but we actually were up in Canada not too long ago for the International. And it was, what a treat. It was truly incredible, really, to be honest with you, to think that someone like me who lived the way I used to live would be living this incredible life today and able to like move about freely in the world. and countries will allow me to come in to their country, no questions asked, and other than let me see your passport and maybe a look. You can't tell, but I'm tattooed from head to toe. So I do get some looks every once in a while, like when I'm going through like that kind of stuff. But that's all about it is a look, and they say welcome to our country, and then our country welcomes us back in every time, and it's truly a miracle. I mean, what can I say more profound to a group of people who have been the single most important thing in altering the course of my life in so many ways, other than I want to say thank you. Alcoholics Anonymous is by far the greatest thing that's ever taken place in my life, and there will be nothing greater. And so, I truly believe that sobriety is a gift. I was blessed with the gift of sobriety on April 30th of 2010. And I can tell you that as far as I was concerned, like sobriety wasn't anything that was on the doorstep or on the precipice for me. I've never been around anybody who was in recovery or claimed to be sober. I didn't entertain the thought. Basically what happened was, like Bill says in his story, I love the book of Alcoholics Anonymous. As you can see, like my books, like about it, it's been like this for years. I hold it together as best I could, and I have some pages that are withering away, so I keep them other places. But Bill describes how I felt the morning of that I surrendered to alcoholism so well. He says, "No words can tell of the loneliness and despair I felt in the bitter morass of self-pity. Quicksand stretched around me in all directions. I was overwhelmed. I had met my match. Alcohol was my master." And, I had never heard those words spoken until obviously I came into the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. And and when I heard those words being read in a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous, I knew exactly how that man felt. He described it very well. And for the first time in my life, I felt like, and I know a lot of people say it. I don't know if I necessarily felt like I belonged here, but I was convinced that I was around some people who had lived like I had lived. There was no doubt in my mind about that. However, I still was really in a severe state of uniqueness, I guess is the best way to describe it. And, when I came into meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous, there was lots of prayer. There was lots of people holding hands in prayer. There were lots of people with smiles on their faces and like carrying on conversations with complete sentences, and they weren't running from each other, and they were welcoming each other. And I thought to myself, like, what in the world have I walked into? And, and, and for a moment, you know, the thought, I entertained the thought that maybe I overreacted about my situation, and I didn't need to be here. Like the book says, when you talk about the subject of God, it was a subject that I had neatly evaded or entirely ignored for 18 years. I started drinking and using when I was 15. And by the grace of God, I sobered up at 33 years old. And, you know, I truly believe, and this obviously is just my belief, but I know it to be true, that for those of us that have made it in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, we have made it here because somebody has prayed for us. And, and, there was definitely somebody praying for me. And, you know, and, you know, you hear people say Alcoholics Anonymous was divinely inspired, and I believe that to be true as well. I mean, how else could a guy like me, who lived the life that I had lived, be put in front of such incredible people who have literally uh, helped me become the man that I am today? And that's what happened. You know, the morning of April 30th of 2010, I was sitting in a place where there was no running water, there was no utilities. If I wanted to eat, I was stealing food to feed myself. That had been going on for many years. I wasn't one who took care of my personal hygiene. I didn't shower. There was empty liquor bottles everywhere. There was other empty bags of things laying around. There was stuff laying on the floor, trash. There was things crawling on the floor. I like to say myself included, because I truly was. I had the windows all boarded up, and the only thing that I knew that morning, and it had never crossed my mind before, was that I'm so grateful there was enough of Matt Wunderlich. How much ever little was left of me, what was left in me that morning, that I said, I don't want to die from this thing. And so I incredibly, I had a phone still that worked, and I don't know how. I don't know how. I don't know who was paying the bill. I don't know how I was able to function enough to even dial a phone, but I did that morning, and I called one of, well, I mean, I could be I'm not missing any fingers, but I could be missing some fingers, and I would still have more fingers in my two hands than people on this planet that would take a phone call from me. And so I called the one person that I thought would, and unbelievably, he did. And I said the three words that forever changed my life. And those words were, I need help. He picked up the phone, and it just came out. And he asked me where I was. I told him where I was at. And he said, can you hold on? And I said, I don't know, but I'm sure as hell going to try. And so within a matter of 15 minutes or so, he was at he showed up at the place I was at, and we started having a conversation, you know. And uh, the way that conversation started, I don't smoke anymore, but one of the other miracles of Alcoholics Anonymous, but I did smoke for a period of time, and I was definitely smoking then. And I remember I was down on the sidewalk, and if any of you have ever been smokers that haven't taken very good care of yourself or your things, you've probably seen the cigarettes that kind of do the zigzag thing, all crushed up in a pack of cigarettes. So that's what I was smoking that morning. And it was just a perfect, like, representation of what my life had come to. Like, I couldn't even keep a pack of cigarettes looking nice, for God's sake. And I definitely wasn't looking good. I had lesions and sores and cuts and bruises all over me. I'm sure I had to smell like from miles away, severely malnourished, and I couldn't hold a conversation or a sentence or a thought together for long at all. And I couldn't look in the eye, but he came up to me and he gave me a hug. And I have to tell you guys, I accepted that hug, and it felt unlike anything I had experienced in a very long time. I definitely became a a monster and felt like I was unworthy of human love or human contact. And so that's how it started. And he made me feel like I was human again. And then from that, we started having a conversation, and what that conversation led to ultimately was me being taken to a drug and alcohol treatment facility by him. A few phone calls were made, and he called some family, and how they knew of the place that I was ultimately being taken to, I'm not quite sure. I mean, I guess I can say God. I know that to be true. And it was strange because I'm the type of person, when I'm drinking and using, at least for all those years that there was a long period of time where I would see things that weren't there, and I would talk to people that weren't there. And that happened for a very long period of time. It wasn't just something that kind of came intermittently. But I knew in that moment that there was someone that I could trust and love that was in front of me and that had my best interest at heart. And I could also say that for the first time, I was being honest with somebody. Well, at least being honest with somebody, unlike I've been honest with anybody for a very long time. And so we got to the drug and alcohol treatment facility, and I'm so grateful. There were some professionals there, as you would expect. And they recognized quickly that, yes, I needed drug and alcohol treatment, but I also needed medical attention quickly. And so it wasn't long, and I was being taken by ambulance to a state-funded psychiatric hospital here, in the area. And what a scary place, And I remember hearing the words pitiful and comprehensible demoralization when I came into the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. And that's how I felt. I felt embarrassed, and I felt all those other things. But I have to say, like, underneath all of that, there was something else going on within me where I started to sense a little bit of courage or strength or something that was pulling me in a different direction that I hadn't felt in a while. And I know what that is today. That comes from surrendering, that when that happens and somebody truly, that what comes from that is all sorts of things that we never thought were possible. And I was starting to feel some of that. But we had to get through some things first. And from there, I was taken to a much larger hospital that had staff that was qualified to meet the needs that I had. And what they did was they saved my life. I mean, when I went in there, my wife is a nurse practitioner, and she will tell you, but they kept putting different blood pressure machines on me. And it was because my blood pressure was and it didn't mean anything to me. It would mean something to someone like her who's highly skilled and trained, but my blood pressure was 200 over 190, which I know today it's supposed to be about 120 over 80, or maybe somewhere in that range. And so they thought their machines were broken, and how wrong they were. I mean, they had a broken man sitting in front of them. And so a whole team of people over the course of about 10 to 12 days really put a lot of effort and time into me and helped restore me. And I had some time in there to think about some things that, really that I allowed to define me for a long period of time. And those were two events that took place in my life with family. I have a father and a mother and a brother who's 15 months younger than me. I saw somebody from Arizona. My brother, he lives out in Mesa. And we were a very happy family, extremely happy, very close. And I don't need to get into all the details, but when I was 15 years old, my father, who was like my best friend, he was my hero. He was a father. He was everything that I feel like a little boy could ever ask for, or anyone could ever ask for in a father. He was a police officer as well. And so when he would walk around in uniform, or when we would go eat dinner while he was on duty, I mean, I truly felt like Superman was next to me. I really, truly did feel like that. People in the community would want to come talk to him. And it was just, and you could see that, like, even as young as I was, like, I could tell that there was like a rapport there. There was a relationship there where, they respected him, and he definitely respected them. And he was a police officer because he wanted to protect others. And I picked up on that. And he definitely wanted to protect his family. And he came home one day and he told us the news that he was diagnosed with cancer. And long story short, about a year and a half later, he passed away from it. And, I'll never forget a conversation he had with me and my brother leading up to that, where there was nothing more the doctors can do. And, he was trying to steer us in the right direction, which we were on the right path up until then. But, I guess being a police officer, he saw some things that I was not aware of, but he had enough forethought to have that conversation with us, and what I can tell you is 2 weeks after he passed away, I took my first drink. And then so on goes the story of alcoholism in my life, and most importantly, self-pity. And our book talks about, there's self all through this book, self-centeredness and self-pity and just, all these, it's just self, 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 self. And so, that was something that was truly on my mind that morning, obviously. And then it was my mother. My mother was one of us. I've been sober for 15 years now, and I've seen a lot of people come in and out of the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. And, my wife is one of those people who came in and out of the rooms and went to several treatment facilities before she got this, and, it doesn't matter how or when we get this. It's just, thank God, by the grace of God, that when we do get it, that miracles take place. But our book says some of us come in here and then we say, thanks for the information. And my mother was one of those people. And I didn't know it at the time. I was, wrapped up in me. I got to read one of her 4 steps that I found in my grandmother's closet many years into sobriety. And it all started to make sense to me. But 2 years prior to me sobering up, my mother ended her life. She took a whole bottle of Oxycontin and a bottle of acetaminophen, and just, she can tell you like what that can do to a human body. So, and that night I was drinking, and I was in a bar the night that happened. I was at the house with them when they took her out, and then I was in a bar that night. And so those were these were the 2 things that I truly allowed to define me. And, what I can tell you is that there was, all throughout my childhood, prayer was nothing that was instilled in our household. I never felt like we couldn't. My grandmother was very strong in prayer. We always prayed when we went to her house for Christmas or the holidays. She used to have to pay me $1 to sit quiet in church. And I, I think about that still to this day, where she would just like pat me on the leg and hand me $1 and a mint and just get me to try to calm down enough to sit there and hear something. And, and I heard something, I didn't know at the time, but the seed was planted. And so, I bring all that up because I before my father had passed away, there was a day where I was coming home from school, and he was diagnosed terminal at that point, but he was still able to go out, and he liked to run. He was a jogger, and he was in the neighborhood jogging, and there was a church behind our house. And I happened to notice one day coming home from school, him being welcomed into a church door, front door, by a pastor. And it stopped me in my tracks. And, I have to tell you, I never developed the courage to ask him what that was or why he was doing that. But what I can tell you is that after he passed away, I had drawn the conclusion that he went in there to beg for his life. And that when things didn't work out the way that I wanted them to work out, I think we all come in here with relationship problems and God problems. And I've just explained to you, like, there's my God problem right there. How could a God, let something like this happen? And so I developed a hatred towards God. And then, for all those years, I was the one that definitely moved, and I moved away from God and anyone who claimed to have a relationship with God, including family. And so, then you find me in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. And, I'll never forget, I was in treatment still. And those of you that have been in treatment, there's people that want to be there, and there's people that have to be there because for whatever reason, and then you have a few of us that are in there, and we're hanging on to everything that's being talked about in there. And we're listening to every member of Alcoholics Anonymous that comes in there and carries a message of hope. And I was that guy. And a man named Carl came in there and carried the message of Alcoholics Anonymous to me. And I love, there's so many things in this book, but it says if we are seriously alcoholic, or if you are seriously alcoholic as we are, we believe there is no middle of the road solution. We were in a position where life was becoming impossible, and if we passed into a region in which there is no return through human aid, we had but two alternatives. One was to go on to the bitter end, blotting out the consciousness of our intolerable situation the best we can, which I'm very equipped to do that. And the other was to accept spiritual help. And then there's one more little thing after that. It says, if we honestly wanted to and were willing to make the effort. And so this man came into the rooms of the treatment facility that I was in and carried that message. And man, I was drawn to it, and I was hanging on to everything. It's incredible because at 5 years sober, I never saw him again. After he left, I remember I ran over to a tech and I asked the tech for a book of Alcoholics Anonymous. And the tech, he was like 6'5". I'm not exaggerating. He was like 6'5", 275 pounds, like a NFL linebacker. And I have never seen a man run so fast in his life. It's like he had not been asked by one of the patients at the treatment facility for a book of Alcoholics Anonymous and God knows how long, and he was going to make sure that I got one in my hands. And he did. And this is the book I still have today, so, and so then I was able, after I got out of treatment, to come into the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, and I got around a bunch of men and women who were practicing and teaching the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous in their daily lives. And I knew in order for this thing to work in my life that I was definitely going to have to follow a spiritual path. And, again, maybe I overreacted about my situation and I don't really need to be here, but, I explained to you what life was like. And I heard people saying things like they were making doorknobs and light bulbs and chairs, their higher power. And I'm not here to judge anyone if that's where their beliefs are, but I just thought to myself, if that's what Alcoholics Anonymous has to offer, I'm a dead man. And I found out Alcoholics Anonymous has a lot more to offer. And I was very unapproachable when I came to the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, extremely unapproachable. And I got around some men who could see a 33-year-old man, maybe on the outside, but deep down inside, a little boy who was scared to death. And didn't know the first thing about how to go about life. But yet I still thought I had a lot to say. And I always find that interesting, and I understand completely when a newcomer comes in and they start going and talking, and I know exactly where they're at, and I'm so and I was singing my song. It was my Poor Me song, that I had been singing about mom and dad for years. And if I could gain your sympathy, then I could justify my actions and I can continue living the way I was living. But that was no longer going to happen in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. And, I try not to cuss a whole lot. I know I do a much better job of today, and I won't cuss now, but I got around a man who's my sponsor, has been my sponsor for all these years. And he heard me singing that song. And, you talk about divinely inspired. This man happened to know me from my past. His children went to school with me. And his wife was a secretary in the high school that I went to. And so he was somewhat well versed in the story of Matt Wunderlich, and he was one of us, right? So it takes one to know one. And I came in there with my song one more time in a meeting and rambled on for 25 minutes. I mean, I just took the whole meeting hostage. That's what I did, And he pulled me out of that meeting afterwards, and he told me, sorry, our little robot thing's talking to us here. You can't stop. Okay. The world we live in today. Sorry, you guys. And he pulled me outside and he said, "You want me to sponsor you?" And I said, "Well, yeah, I asked you to sponsor me here, just a couple days ago." And he said, "I will sponsor you and I will take you through this book under one condition." And I said, "Okay." And he said, "Shut up and sit down and listen next time you come to a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous, and maybe you'll get this thing." And I can tell you all that, I'm not some big, bad, tough guy. I don't claim to be. But if you would have spoken to me like that prior to coming to the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, there was going to be consequences in some way, shape, or form, but pitiful and comprehensible demoralization, right? And this man was able to speak to me in a way that he got my attention quickly, and I'm so grateful I listened because it changed my life. He started giving me some simple directions, which were he wanted me to stand at the front door of the meeting facility and welcome people into the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous as they came in. Hi, my name is Matt Wunderlich. Welcome to Alcoholics Anonymous. What's your name? So that was one of my directions. And I can tell you, like, I'm a former United States Marine. I'm a former college athlete. I lived on the streets. You know, I have all these things in my head, but I have never been so scared in my life to stand at the front door of a Alcoholics Anonymous meeting and welcome people into the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. And how it's just fascinating to me, the disease of alcoholism, you know. But it was awesome because I got an opportunity to start looking people in the eye, getting to know some people. People started welcoming me into the rooms and welcoming me into the fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I was able to do the same thing. And there was some other simple directions: pour coffee, empty the ashtrays, clean the toilets, you know, all these things. And I'm like, this is what I'm dying here. And this is what Alcoholics Anonymous has to offer. But again, you know, I had no idea what was really taking place, and he was allowing me to get outside of myself and start building some pride in what I was doing and who I was, and so, you know, he also put me on a task that I should be able to go anywhere within a 50-mile radius of where I live into a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous and know somebody. Now, I have to tell you that I was riding a bicycle when it came to Alcoholics Anonymous. Not immediately, but my godmother took me in the first 6 months of my sobriety, and I'll never forget. She was leaving me like $3 of allowance. If you remember being a child and maybe mom or dad left you some allowance on the counters to get a snack for the day, that's what was going on for Matt Wunderlich at 33 years old, and so I would wake up and there'd be $3 laying out there on the counter, and I'd go off to my meetings and get whatever I could get with $3, and you know, and she was feeding me, she was clothing me, and I remember at one point she said, "We're going to go to Walmart today," and I said, "Why are we going to Walmart? I don't need anything." And she said, "Just come with me." And so we went, and we walk in, and she takes me back to the bike rack, and I'm like, "You got to be kidding me!" Like, there was moms and dads, and it'd be like this time of the year. I mean, it wasn't, but there was moms and dads in there with their children, and they're trying on bikes, and they had their children riding bikes around in the aisles, and she tells me she's going to buy me a bicycle because she can't get me everywhere that I need to go. And so I I was trying to find a bike in there that didn't have like streamers running off the handlebars, or it wasn't pink, or nothing against pink or purple, but trying to find a bike that looked like I don't know, as nice, as cool looking a bike as I could find myself to be on. And I just remember thinking, like, this is what my life has come to. But I also remember thinking in the thought, or the voice came through my mind that, what am I willing to do? Because I kept hearing that over and over in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, that I have to be willing to go to any length. And so I picked out the bike that I thought would be all right. And then she did ask me to get on it and ride it around. So here I was next to like little 6-year-olds and 7-year-olds in Walmart for a minute. And I got off it real quick. I said, "Yep, this will work. Let's get going." So, and off I went on a bicycle. And man, what I can tell you is that as well changed my life. I had never worked for anything that I can recall that was of any value in my life, and for many years. And that bike, it gave me a freedom, and it gave me an opportunity to like show myself that, like, I can do this. And I am willing to do this, whatever it takes. You know, I'd be out there like riding my bike from a meeting to go find work, which my first job in Alcoholics Anonymous was as a custodian, and then going to outpatient and going to see my sponsor. And there'd be days where it's like torrential downpours, and I'd be stuck at, you know, a intersection, and there'd be people from Alcoholics Anonymous that would happen to like look over at me and say, "Hey, throw your bike in here, you know, in the truck with us. And we got room." And I would say, "Thank you, but you have to let me do this. Please let me do this." And they did. And so that's how my journey started, and really my relationship that I started to build with men and women in Alcoholics Anonymous, and most importantly God, and what he did for me, my sponsor, by getting me out to other meetings, was I got to meet people from all different walks of life, from all different backgrounds. We are people who normally would not mix. And it talks about in our book, that a spiritual awakening or a spiritual experience, right, where there's a personality change that takes place, where the way we feel about ourselves, the way we feel about God or others, about life, it changes. And for some of us it's quickly, some of us it's slowly. For me it was definitely slowly. I'm in my home group, we call ourselves the slow learners. So I'm in the right place. And it definitely happened slowly over a period of time, but it happened by me getting to know others and shutting up in meetings and listening and hearing the word of the message of God in Alcoholics Anonymous. And what I learned is that there's so many people, my wife included, who have suffered, and you don't have to suffer tragedy or trauma to be here. So please I don't want to mislead anybody, but some of us do. And there's people in these rooms amongst us, my wife included, who would and have suffered what I would consider to be far greater tragedy or trauma in their life than I ever did. And yet they're full of joy. They have smiles on their face. They're helping other alcoholics. They're talking about God, and miracles are taking place in their life, right? So I have a decision to make, right? That, am I going to go onto the bitter end, or am I going to, walk down the spiritual path with all of you? And so, by meeting all of you and getting to know all of you and listening to you and truly learning where you all have come from and where you are today, those things started to take place in my life. And I love it. In our book, it says the verdict of the ages is that faith means courage. All men and women of faith have courage. They trust their God. They never apologize for God. Instead, they let him demonstrate through us what he can do. And what I can tell you is that you all have been demonstrations to me of what can truly happen in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous if we just sit here and shut up and listen and keep coming back. And sometimes that's all I can do. That's all I could do. And it's grown to be much greater than that by leaps and bounds, I can tell you, So I started to slowly unlock that door and build a relationship with God. And, I love, where we read, how it works in the ABCs, right? And if any of you, and I'm sure some of you have read the original working manuscript, A, that we were alcoholic and could not manage our own lives; B, that probably no human power could have relieved our alcoholism; and C, that God could and would if he were sought. It says, then being convinced, we are at step 3. In the original working manuscript, it says, if you are not yet convinced of these 3 proposals, by time you've got to this point of the book, you ought to reread it up to this point or else throw it away. And I mean, they didn't keep that in the book that we have today, but I just, I love where these people came from, because, I need to know that. I need to know that what I'm walking around with has the power to destroy lives, and I need to know that every single day. And I also need to know that there is a God, and that God is available to me, and that if I reach out and build this relationship with God, that miracles can take place in my life. And I need to know that every single day. And I make that connection every single morning. My wife will tell you I get up at 3:30 in the morning for work, and the first thing I do is I get on my knees and I pray. And prayer is alive and well in our home. We pray together. We pray together at night, and we pray together throughout the day. And it's something that's become the biggest part of my life. And it happened in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. It happened with me sitting down with my sponsor one day in his living room at his kitchen table, and asking him to say a prayer with me. And he did that. And there's a prayer in every step of this book of Alcoholics Anonymous. And if you have a sponsor who's taken you through this book, then they should be pointing out that those prayers to you, because they are alive and well in this book and in these steps. And that's where I learned to pray. And that's where I learned to develop a relationship with God, and then relationship with people. And one of those people that I was able to develop a relationship with was my grandmother. Her name's Opal, and God, she was just the most incredible woman in the world. And I spent these last 15 years being her caretaker. And then, me and my wife, since me and her have been married she jumped on and became basically like a daughter to her in so many ways. And we were able to carry her through the last years and days of her life. She passed away this past June, but not before she was able to come. We got married in the mountains up in Colorado, and it was so incredible. She was 97 years old then. She passed away at 99. But Alcoholics Anonymous, my wife, got her to about 8,000 feet in the mountains of Colorado, along with about 100 people from Alcoholics Anonymous who joined us. And we had sponsors there and grand sponsors and sponsees. And it was just amazing to be a part of something so magical and to have her there. We got to have a lot of conversations over the years, me and her, as a sober man, and one of those conversations led to the relationship that I have with God today. And it was a discussion that we were having about me in sobriety and me starting to open up the door to a relationship with God. And she became very interested in learning how that was happening in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous when she was trying to pay me to, to develop that relationship with God. And, how is it that it's happening in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous? And through that, why did you develop a resentment towards God? And so I got to, really share that with her. And she had ideas and knew, but I wasn't as truthful and upfront with her as I could have been over the years. And, I told her the story about Dad and seeing him walk into that church and then things not happening. And she stopped me right in my tracks that day. My grandma had macular degeneration and she barely could see at this point, but I'm telling you right now, she could see me in that moment. And she was looking like directly at me, and she says, "You don't remember, do you?" And I said, "Remember what?" And she said, "The story that the pastor talked about at your father's funeral." And I'm like, "No." And I guess trauma had set in 15 years of alcoholism and drug addiction. I definitely have some memory loss, but things that I had neatly evaded or entirely ignored. And she said, "That pastor was the pastor that opened the door for your father that day in the church." And they had never met before that day. But my father went and knocked on the door. The pastor was there. The pastor opened the door. My father said, "Can I come in and talk?" The pastor said, "Absolutely, I have time." And he was telling this story at my father's funeral, this man that came in off the street from a jog and wanted to talk about his family. And he, got the pastor up to speed on his childhood and what he was doing these days as a father. And then the fact that he was, given this news that he was going to pass away soon from terminal cancer. And the pastor ultimately got to the point of the story where he said, "Why are you here?" And my father, the man, said, "I'm here for you to pray with me." And the pastor said, "What do you want to pray for?" And he says, "I want to pray for my family, that they will be okay when I leave this world." And, like our book says, maybe we live in this strange world of alcoholism where everything is exaggerated and distorted. And I had created this story, this perception of what that was about. And I was so wrong, and it almost killed me. It almost killed me. And I'm so grateful for the men and women in Alcoholics Anonymous who showed me that there is a different way, and that it got me to open up with people that I would never have opened up before. And it unlocked everything for me, and it took everything away from me. And what I know today is what many of you know, and it says it in our book that when we sincerely took such a position, all sorts of remarkable things followed. We had a new employer. Being all powerful, he provided what we needed if we kept close to him and performed his work well. Established on such a footing, we became less and less interested in ourselves, our little plans and designs. More and more, we became interested in seeing what we could contribute to life. As we felt new power flow in, as we enjoyed peace of mind, as we discovered we could face life successfully, as we became conscious of his presence, we began to lose our fear of today, tomorrow, the hereafter. We were reborn. And I have truly been reborn in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. When my grandmother passed away, I had to make the decision to put her on hospice, and we had all these people coming in, and it was just incredible. It really was. I remember at one point asking her, like, before she was, unable to communicate back to me, like, did you ever think it was going to be me? Being the one that was like so involved in her life. And she said, "No, but I'm so glad and grateful it was." And we got to share a lot of stuff together, and, we got to share prayers together, and I got to say her favorite, the prayer that she wanted at her eulogy. I got to say that to her as she was taking her final breaths, and hold her and just tell her how happy I was that she'd been saying for a long time she was ready to go. She matter of fact, she said, "Whoever called these the golden years can kiss my you know what." But we got to do so many things together because I got to bring her. Kay brought her to a meeting when I celebrated 12 years, and she definitely knew who Alcoholics Anonymous and what Alcoholics Anonymous was before she went on, and I'm so grateful for that. And I'm just so grateful for all the things that have taken place. When me and her got to go to France for our honeymoon after we got married, and I just think to myself, like we were walking through the streets of Paris what were we doing the first night we got there? We were going to a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. And it was just so incredible sitting there with people from all over the world that were there. Paris is a hub, as many of you probably know. And man, it was just so neat to hear people from Russia and people from Italy and people from Spain. And, I mean, we went to Geneva, Switzerland. We got to go to some meetings there. It was just incredible to think like this little thing that started here has changed the lives of millions of people and their families. And that I get to be a part of this thing, So the greatest thing that will ever take place in my life is Alcoholics Anonymous. Everything I was looking for in alcohol and drugs, I found in sobriety. And I'm floored every time another man or young man comes walking in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous dying from this thing and asks me for help. And it just makes it puts everything into perspective for me. It says, cling to the thought that in God's hands our dark past is the greatest possession you hold. The key to life and happiness for others. With it, we can avert death and misery for them. And that's what you all have done for me. And I pray that with God's help and the men and women in Alcoholics Anonymous that have surrounded me, that I will be able to continue to do that. So thank you for allowing me to be of service. I hope to see all of you in 2030, and maybe we'll get up to Toronto before then. I think we're going to Italy next. So if we can, and we're going to see what Alcoholics Anonymous is all about in Italy. So I thank you. I love you guys.
Just a quick reminder to subscribe, like, or follow if you like the show on any of your favorite listening platforms. If you like the speakers and other content on the podcast, please show us some love by leaving a review and consider making a PayPal contribution to help keep the show going at paypal.me/a shot glass of recovery. Every dollar makes a difference, and we thank you. Our speakers come from my AA home group, AA Solution Seekers. We meet every day at 7 a.m., so pop in sometime and say hello. Until next time, thanks for joining me on A Shot Glass of Recovery.
Everything you do, the answer lies inside you.